Okay, so what are feature time variables? So feature time variables are variables that are understood by ESM tools and trigger actually basically calendar operations and calendar functioning and calendar control. So the most important ones are initial date and final date, and those stay on the general section of your experiment, and they have this type of format. They are defined as a date format. And basically, if you remember this graph of the whole simulation, where you have basically this arrow, it's telling where the experiment is starting and when is the experiment finishing. Okay, and then we also have this end year, end month, and end day. These are also feature variables that control the frequency of the restarts. So, for example, at least the frequency for the restarts of ESM Tools calendar. So basically, it controls the run length for ESM Tools. So if you say end day 0, end month 0, end year 1, you are restarting every year. If you state end year 2, you're going to be running runs for that are 2 years long, and they will be restarting every 2 years. If you add end month 1, end year 1, you are going to be running runs of 1 year and a month in theory. Not sure what would happen. It's a long time I don't try that. I think it would work, but normally that's not what we do.
But this is mostly on the general, right?
This is general, yeah. These are feature variables that are defined in general because they control run length and simulation length. Okay.
In one of exercise, we use end date. It is also the feature variables.
Yes, we are going to be looking at those right in the next presentation. Sorry, in the next point. If I manage to go. Okay, and then we have here some variables. Restart rate, restart first, and restart unit for FESOM. And we have them also here on the FESOM 2.1 YAML configuration file. Can someone tell me if these variables, if these time variables are feature variables or are not feature variables, and why? So they are not feature variables precisely because they go into name these changes. Yeah. So why is this different, and why are these feature variables of the general experiment not linked directly to this? The reason is because sometimes you want to run, for example, 1 year simulation, and you want to be producing restart files, even if you're running 1 year run, even if you're running one single year run, and FESOM is running through this whole year without restarting. These nameless changes allow you to produce every month restarts with FESOM. And that means if FESOM breaks, you can always restart. You don't have to run the whole year again. But this is a control, an extra control that FESOM allows you to do. So if we would make this be the default, like this is linked to this, we could do that. But we have to make sure, and we have not done it yet, but we have to make sure if we do that, we still allow the user to control this if they want to run a full year run with monthly restarts, for example.
So is there some sort of advantage to that as opposed to just monthly restarts where the model actually restarts every month?
Yes. So I think the advantage, and please, Jan, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have to, every time you restart, your model has to read. You have to not only output, but you have to also read the files, and that takes time.
Okay.
Is that?
Yeah, and you have to do the MPI initialization again, right? And some models, they can do that while keeping the same slurm allocation. The worst case is that you also need a new slurm allocation. So you might wait for every month, right?
Okay.
You simulate for half an hour and then you wait for 3 days, for 3 hours.
So it's just faster.
Yeah, it's faster to keep it running for as long as the time allows. And then for extra safety, you just have the extra restart files in between.
Okay.
Of course, the problem is this is extra data. And nowadays, we are more data bound than computing time bound. So I think this is not a very useful feature anymore. because most of the time it's cheaper to just run it again than to store all this, 12 times as much data on your disk all the time. So I wouldn't, unless you have something very specific that you want to do, this is not super useful, I think.
Some people, yeah, have, but
So there is a need for it for some people, but in general, I wouldn't make great use of it. I wouldn't just by default, write 12 times as much restart files.
so in the future, in fact, we should do that, and we should allow by default that in your run script, you can actually change that if you want, but by default, you should be able to be taking these values from the feature variables. And that's actually sort of done in this way for OpenIFS. So for OpenIFS, you don't need to specify any variable there.
But you can still do it the other way, right? So you can write more frequent restart files, but it's not done by default.
But here, for example, let's say, and that's the exercise, let's say that you want to change from, well, here is 1 month, but in your run script is a daily. What would you have to do if you want to change from daily to months? Well, the answer is here. You will change the final date, obviously, because you don't want to finish on the first 3 days. You probably want to finish, for example, in the third month. Then you say, I'm going to restart every month. And then you have to come here and change the restart unit from D, which stands for days, to change it to M, which is for months.
For example, if I put year and the breaks, then I don't have the restart, right? Before the first year is completed.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, what do you think would happen if you put the final date, third of the year, and then we say N year 1?
No restart.
It's just going to ignore the final date, right? It's just going to run 1 year. So it always checks at the end of your run whether the final date has been reached or beyond the final date has been reached. And that's only for checking if a new run or new leg should be started. Otherwise.
So you were asking about the end date. That's also a feature variable. So these 4 variables are pretty useful for you, because they are defined already by ESM tools, and you can use them in your run script, and you can use them to do operations with them. So start date tells you when is the start of the run, not of the simulation. The simulation is initial date. And the end date is the same for the end of the run. So these are 2 for runs. And then next date, it tells you the first, the date of the following run, the beginning of the following run, and parent date tells you parent date or pref date. There are 2 variables. They are basically the same. They tell you the end of the previous run. What's the date of the end of the previous run? Oh yeah, and this is so the use case of this thing, for example, is that most of the models produce or are configured to produce files that are time-stamped. And then if you want to be copying files around, and this is not defined on your default configuration, then you can use these feature variables to actually concatenate, extract year, extract month, and then be concatenating for creating a name for these files and then being able to copy them around if they are not already implemented. But again, we look at that, we'll see that on the file dictionary exercise.